Lady Beatrice, a daughter whose gentle spirit was housed in a form her father deemed too ample for the marriage market, was cast out into the merciless heart of the desert, a living disgrace meant to be erased by the sun, only to be found by a chieftain who looked upon her and saw not a flaw, but a future. The Duke's study was as cold as the pronouncement he delivered, his words chipping away at the last of her worth like a chisel on ice. "You are an impediment," he stated, not looking at her, but at the portrait of her slender, long-dead mother that hung over the mantelpiece. "Your appetites are a stain upon the honor of this house. No man of standing will have you, and I will not suffer the whispers and the pity any longer." Beatrice stood before him, her silk dress, which had felt so fine that morning, now seeming like a garish costume for a fool. Her hands, soft and white, twisted the fabric at her waist. She could not speak, shame was a physical thing, a heavy stone lodged in her throat. She had tried, truly she had. She had endured weeks of watery broths and joyless fasts, only for her body to betray her with its stubborn, soft curves. He saw her silence as insolence. "You will be taken west," he continued, his voice devoid of any paternal warmth. "To the territories. There is a trading post, a desolate place for desolate people. What becomes of you there is of no consequence to me. You are no longer my daughter." The cruelty was so profound, so absolute, it felt unreal. 2 guards, men who had known her since she was a child, entered the room, their eyes fixed on the floor. They did not touch her, but their presence was a cage. She was led from the opulent prison of her home, past servants who averted their gaze, and placed in a crude wagon. The finality of the wooden gate closing behind her was the sound of her world ending. The journey was a blur of dust and despair, a jolting descent from a life of privilege to one of utter abandonment, her only companion the echoing finality of her father's verdict. She was nothing. Less than nothing. A problem to be discarded in the vast, uncaring wilderness. The Duke did not even watch her go, he had already returned to his ledgers, erasing her name as one might strike a bad debt. The desert was an anvil, and the sun was its hammer. For 2 days, Beatrice wandered from the remote outpost where the guards had abandoned her with a single waterskin and a sneer. The fine leather of her shoes was shredded, her feet blistered and bleeding. The silk of her dress was torn and stained, clinging to her sweat-soaked skin. Thirst was a living creature, clawing at her throat, and the world had shrunk to a shimmering haze of heat and a desperate, rasping need for water. She stumbled, her body, which had always been a source of shame, now a leaden weight she could no longer command. She fell against the hot, coarse sand, the last of her strength leaving her in a ragged sigh. This was it, then. The death her father had ordained. She thought of him in his cool, dark study and felt a flicker of something other than despair, a hot, sharp anger. She would die because she was not thin enough, not pretty enough, not worthy enough. As her vision began to darken at the edges, a shadow fell across her. She thought it was a vulture, a final indignity. But then she heard the soft scuff of moccasins on sand. She forced her heavy eyelids open. A man stood over her, his figure a stark silhouette against the blinding sky. He was tall and lean, his skin the color of burnished copper, his long black hair held back by a simple leather band. His face was all sharp angles and quiet intensity, his dark eyes assessing her not with contempt or pity, but with a calm, unnervous curiosity. He knelt, his movements fluid and economical. He said nothing, but unslung a clay jug from his shoulder and gently lifted her head, pressing the cool rim to her cracked lips. The water was the most glorious thing she had ever tasted. It was life itself, and it was being given to her by a stranger in this place where she was meant to die. He let her drink slowly, his hand steady behind her neck. When she was done, he simply looked at her, his gaze taking in her ruined dress, her soft, sunburnt face, and the exhaustion that radiated from her. He was a leader, she could feel it in his stillness, in the way the other men who had appeared behind him waited for his signal. His name, she would learn, was Canai, and in that moment, he did not see a discarded noblewoman. He saw a person, lost and suffering. He gestured to his men, and with a gentleness that stunned her, they lifted her onto a horse. As they began to move, she lapsed into a feverish unconsciousness, her last coherent thought a profound and startling irony. Her father had sent her here to be erased, and a silent, savage stranger had just saved her life. The Apache camp was a living thing, a scattering of hide dwellings that blended into the ochre landscape. It pulsed with the sounds of children laughing, dogs barking, and the rhythmic thump of women working hides. For Beatrice, waking in a dwelling on a soft pile of furs, it was overwhelming. Fear, a cold, unfamiliar companion, wrapped around her heart. These were the people her father spoke of with derision and terror, savages, heathens. Yet, she was alive because of them. Canai entered the dwelling, ducking his head. He carried a wooden bowl of savory-smelling stew and a piece of flatbread. He set it beside her without a word, his expression unreadable. Beatrice flinched, expecting a command, a demand. Instead, he just waited. She ate, her hunger a raw, desperate need. It was the best food she had ever had, rich and nourishing. When she finished, he took the empty bowl and left as silently as he had arrived. The women of the tribe were curious. They would pause in their work to watch her, their dark eyes taking in her pale, soft skin and her useless hands. They spoke in a language that was a river of sound she could not follow, and she felt their judgment, different from her father's, but judgment all the same. She was a curiosity, a burden. An old woman with a face like a beautiful, cracked riverbed came to her. Her name was Tarza. She did not speak Beatrice's language, but she communicated with her hands. She pointed to Beatrice, then to a pile of greasy, raw hides, and then handed her a scraper made of bone. The message was clear: you will work, or you are worthless. The first day was a humiliating failure. The tool was awkward in her soft hands, which were quickly rubbed raw and bloody. The stench of the hide made her stomach turn. The other women watched, their faces impassive, but she could feel their skepticism. That evening, as she nursed her blistered palms by the fire, Canai sat near her. He didn't look at her, but spoke to the flames. The hand learns what the mind is willing to teach it. It was the first full sentence he had ever said to her. It was not praise, nor was it comfort. It was a simple statement of fact, a challenge. She looked from her bleeding hands to his strong, capable ones. He was right. Her mind had been taught she was useless. Now, she had to be willing to teach it something new. Days turned into a week of grueling, painful effort. Beatrice's body ached in ways she never knew possible. The muscles in her back and shoulders, long dormant beneath layers of softness, screamed in protest. Her hands, once prized for their delicacy, were a mess of blisters, cuts, and deep, throbbing pain. She ruined the first hide, scraping too deep and tearing it. A ripple of quiet, knowing glances passed between the other women. Shame, hot and sharp, pricked her eyes, but it was different now. It was not the passive shame of her father's judgment, but the active frustration of failure. She refused to cry. She simply picked up another hide and began again, her jaw set with a grim determination she didn't know she possessed. Tarza, the old woman, would watch her, occasionally making a sharp clicking sound of disapproval and adjusting the angle of Beatrice's tool with her own gnarled fingers, demonstrating the precise, rocking motion required. Beatrice copied her, her movements clumsy and inefficient at first, but slowly, painstakingly, she began to find a rhythm. Canai remained a quiet observer. He never offered overt help, never interfered with Tarza's tutelage. But sometimes, in the evening, he would leave a small pot of soothing salve made from desert plants near her sleeping furs. He never acknowledged the gift, and she never acknowledged receiving it, but the unspoken gesture was a thread of connection, a silent encouragement that meant more than any words of praise could have. He was not judging her success or failure, but her effort. He was watching her will take shape. One afternoon, as the sun beat down, she finished a hide. It was not perfect, there were still a few rough patches, but it was whole. Intact. Usable. She ran her raw hand over the scraped surface, a wave of profound, bone-deep satisfaction washing over her. Tarza came and inspected her work, running a critical thumb over the leather. The old woman looked at the hide, then at Beatrice's bloody hands, and then she gave a single, sharp nod. It was not a smile, but it was acceptance. It was validation. That night, a space was made for her closer to the main fire, a silent invitation into the circle. She belonged. Weeks turned into months. The sun and the work remade Beatrice. The soft, pale flesh firmed into resilient muscle. Her waist, once constricted by corsets, grew strong and supple. Her skin, perpetually shielded from the light, darkened to a healthy bronze. Her hands were no longer the hands of a lady, they were the calloused, capable hands of a woman who knew her own strength. She learned the language, not from lessons, but from listening, from the patient corrections of children and the quiet instructions of the women. She learned to grind corn, to find edible roots, to weave watertight baskets from yucca fibers, her fingers growing nimble and sure. The shame that had been her constant companion for years simply sloughed away, like a dead skin she no longer needed. She rarely thought of her father or the life she had lost, it felt like a story about someone else, a pale ghost in a silk dress. Her connection with Canai deepened in the spaces between words. It was in the way he would bring her the first wild plum of the season, or how she would mend a tear in his leather tunic, her stitches small as neat. He taught her the names of the stars, his voice a low rumble in the vast silence of the desert night. He would point to a constellation. "That is the hunter," he would say. "He does not chase what he cannot catch, but he never gives up the trail of what he needs." His lessons were always parables, his wisdom woven into the fabric of the world around them. One evening, he watched her weaving a basket, her brow furrowed in concentration. He reached out and gently touched a lock of her hair that had fallen across her face, tucking it behind her ear. His touch was feather-light, yet it sent a jolt through her entire being. She looked up, and for the first time, she met his gaze without flinching, without a trace of her old fear. In his dark eyes, she did not see a chieftain looking at a stray he had rescued. She saw a man looking at a woman he respected. A woman he valued. The realization bloomed in her chest, warm and radiant. Here, valued not for a title or a dowry, but for her hands, her spirit, her resilience. Here, she was not too much, she was, at last, enough. A year had passed since Beatrice had been cast out, a year in which she had been reborn. She no longer thought of herself as Lady Beatrice, a name that belonged to a weak, frightened girl. Here, the children called her Isha, meaning woman, a title she had earned with her own 2 hands. Her life was measured in seasons, not social calendars. She knew the taste of rain on the wind and the signs of a coming frost. She was part of the community, her contributions woven into the daily life of the tribe. Her intellect, long suppressed in a world that valued only a woman's appearance, found new purpose. She had a memory for the stories Tarza told, the complex genealogies and the histories of their people, and the elders began to listen when she spoke, appreciating the sharpness of her mind. This new life was tested when a sickness swept through the camp, a fever that left children weak and listless. The tribe's usual remedies were not working as well against this unfamiliar ailment. Beatrice, racking her brain, remembered her lonely girlhood, spent devouring books in her father's library. One had been a dusty old herbal, detailing European plants and their properties. She recalled a passage about willow bark, how it could be brewed into a tea to quell fevers and ease pain. There were willows that grew thick along the narrow, seasonal creek bed a half-mile from the camp. While the tribe's shaman was skeptical, Canai listened to her intently. He saw the certainty in her eyes. "Show me," he said simply. Together, they gathered the bark. Beatrice showed Tarza how to prepare it, boiling it into a bitter tea. She gently coaxed the first sick child to drink, her voice soft and reassuring. Within a day, the child's fever broke. They administered the tea to the others, and one by one, the sickness began to recede. The respect she had earned with her hands was now matched by the reverence she earned with her mind. She had saved them, using knowledge from the world that had rejected her. That evening, Canai came to her as she sat watching the moon rise. He sat beside her, the comfortable silence stretching between them. "Your spirit is strong," he said, his voice quiet but full of meaning. "Like the willow. It bends, but it does not break. It gives life back to the people." He then placed a small, intricately beaded necklace in her hands. It was not a jewel from a London goldsmith, it was something far more precious, crafted with hours of patient work. It was a gift of profound respect, an acknowledgement of her place among them. A place she had not been given, but had made for herself. 2 years after she had been left for dead, a column of dust on the horizon announced the arrival of the world she had forgotten. Soldiers in crisp, blue uniforms, their brass buttons glinting in the sun, rode into the canyon. And at their head, on a fine black stallion, was her father. The Duke looked older, his face etched with new lines of stress, but his eyes held the same cold, appraising quality. He dismounted, his polished boots sinking into the dust he so clearly despised. His gaze swept over the camp with disdain, before landing on Beatrice. She stood straight and tall, her deerskin dress practical and comfortable, her hair braided down her back. She did not cower. She did not look away. He stared at her, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He was seeing not the soft, shamed girl he had banished, but a strong, confident woman. "Beatrice," he said, his voice tight. "Your presence is required. A politically advantageous match has been arranged. Your rustication is over." He spoke as if she were a piece of property being reclaimed from a wilderness pawnshop. He did not ask if she was well. He did not apologize. He simply commanded. Canai stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of her. He did not draw a weapon. He did not need to. His very presence was a shield, his stillness a silent challenge to the Duke's authority. The soldiers shifted, their hands resting on their rifles. The air grew thick with tension. The Duke's lip curled. "Step aside, savage. This is a family matter." Canai did not move. He did not even look at the Duke. His eyes were on Beatrice, a question in their dark depths. It was not his choice to make. It was hers. This was the moment her entire life had led to. The collision of two worlds, two value systems, two men who saw her in entirely different ways. One saw a tool, a disappointment to be discarded and reclaimed at will. The other saw a partner, a survivor, a woman of worth. Her past and her future stood before her, demanding she choose. The Duke saw her hesitation and mistook it for weakness, for the return of the obedient daughter he had once known. "Do not be a fool, girl," he snapped, his voice laced with the old, familiar contempt. "This is your last chance to have a respectable life. To be a duchess. To have wealth and power. What is there for you here? Dirt, squalor, and a life of servitude to these primitives." Each word was designed to wound, to remind her of the shame he had ingrained in her. But the words had no power anymore. They were echoes from a hollow world she no longer inhabited. Beatrice looked at her father's face, at the cold ambition in his eyes, and she felt nothing but a distant, clinical pity. Then she looked at Canai. He stood solid as the red rock of the canyon walls, his faith in her unwavering. He was not offering her a title or wealth. He was offering her respect. He was offering her a home. She took a step forward, moving from behind Canai's protective stance to stand beside him, a partner. She met her father's gaze directly, her own voice clear and steady, shaped by the desert winds and the quiet confidence she had earned. "You speak of a respectable life," she said, her tone even. "I have one. You speak of wealth. I am richer here than I ever was in your cold house. And you speak of servitude." She held up her calloused hands. "These hands serve my family. My people. And it is a service I give with honor, not shame." The Duke's face flushed with fury. "You would choose this filth, over your own blood? Over your name?" Beatrice gave a small, sad shake of her head. "You are not my blood. My blood is the bond one share with those who valued me when I was worthless. And my name is not Beatrice anymore. You took that from me when you left me to die." She placed a hand on Canai's arm, a simple gesture of belonging that was more powerful than any legal document. "I am Isha. And I am home for a moment." The Duke looked as if he would order his men to take her by force. He saw her defiance, Canai's unyielding strength, and the silent, resolute faces of the Apache warriors who had gathered, their own weapons now visible. He saw a battle he could not win, not here. With a final curse, a snarl of defeated rage, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away, his soldiers trailing behind him like a funeral procession. The dust settled, leaving behind a profound and beautiful silence. Canai turned to her, and for the first time, a slow, genuine smile transformed his stoic face. He reached out and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Isha," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The name was a promise. It was her truth. Years passed, as peacefully as water flowing over smooth stones. Beatrice, now fully Isha, never saw her father again. She and Canai led their people with a shared wisdom, a partnership of heart and mind that became a legend in itself. His quiet strength was complemented by her keen intellect and deep compassion. She bore him 2 children, a son with his father's dark, observant eyes and a daughter with her mother's resilient spirit. She taught them the stories of the tribe and the tales from her old books, weaving 2 worlds into one. She never forgot the girl she had been, the one who wept in a cold study, but she did not pity her. That girl's pain had been the seed from which this strong, rooted life had grown. One evening, as the sun bled orange and purple across the desert sky, she sat with Canai watching their children play. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. Her hand was no longer soft, nor was it the hand of a duchess. It was strong, marked by work and by love, and it fit perfectly in his. He brought it to his lips and kissed her knuckles. No words were needed. In the quiet of the canyon, surrounded by the family she had found and the man who had seen her from the very beginning, she was not just accepted, she was cherished. Her father had cast her out to become nothing, and in doing so, had given her the chance to become everything. Her punishment had been her salvation, and her disgrace had been the path to her greatest honor. She was finally, completely, home.